Let the fireworks begin. House Republicans, fresh off the midterm majority win, promising a boatload of blockbuster investigations. And it looks like President Biden and his son Hunter are the biggest fish on the menu. I'm Jackie DeAngelis, in for Kennedy. Now, for years, the president has claimed that he has never spoken to Hunter about his son's business dealings. The problem is Hunter's laptop has suggested that's a big lie. Text messages and emails allegedly show Dad not only knew what Hunter was up to, but that he might have profited from it. Remember the big guy? And the reason this is so troubling, because Hunter was working with a lot of sketchy people in a lot of shady places. Ukraine, China, Kazakhstan, you name it. Now, earlier today, the incoming chair of the House Oversight Committee, Kentucky Republican Congressman James Comer, he said he plans to get to the bottom of everything.
This is an investigation of Joe Biden, the President of the United States, and why he lied to the American people about his knowledge and participation in his family's international business schemes. National security interests require the committee conduct investigation, and we will pursue all avenues that have long been ignored.
Congressman Comer went on to claim that the Bidens set up dozens of shell companies and wired millions of dollars to people all over the world. But just last week, the president challenged Republicans to put up or shut up. Watch.
What's your message to Republicans who are considering investigating your family, and particularly your son Hunter's business dealings?
Lots of luck in your senior year, as my coach used to say. Look, I think the American public want us to move on and get things done for them.
So, how involved was the president? And will Republican-led committees have the teeth to find out? Joining me now is Fox News contributor and host of the Ben Domenech podcast, Ben Domenech. Ben, it's great to see you tonight, and I want to dig into this a little bit with you because now that the Republicans have secured the House, this seems to be top on the agenda. And a lot of people, since the Hunter Biden laptop story first emerged, have said this should be investigated.
Look, I absolutely think that this should be investigated. No president should escape the kind of allegations that have been raised with obvious and I think in many cases publicly verifiable information about the decisions that his son made, many of which might have benefited the president financially and benefited his family. These are questions that should not escape notice just because you have powerful friends or powerful family members. At the same time, I think that Republicans run the risk of not understanding the consequences of this election that they just went through. The fact is that the American people elected a Republican majority to get into a lot of things. I think that most Americans actually care more about investigations, perhaps, of the lack of baby formula, the overreach of the FBI when it came to going after Americans across the country who raised concerns about what was going on in their schools. And of course, I think that there are also other questions to look back even further at the disastrous exit from Afghanistan, other issues that ought to also be major priorities for investigation. So what I would encourage Republicans to do is to say, look, this is going to be part of a comprehensive view of what's going on. But if I'm ranking the things that I'm most concerned about, Hunter Biden and what he's done is still lower than what's going on at our southern border on a daily basis. The kind of invasion that we are seeing when it comes to fentanyl that is killing Americans every day. And so don't lose sight of the bigger picture here, guys. Yes, go after and look into this. It deserves to be looked after. But there are also big issues that are affecting Americans on a daily basis that need to be prioritized as well.
I think you bring up a great point there. And I think a lot of people would agree with you as well, that even the investigations into the past mistakes to a certain degree aren't as important as Republican leaders and the House trying to pass some legislation, trying to undo some of the damage that has been done here. I mean, the one thing that I know Wall Street has hailed is the fact that they'll be able to at least block spending, right? We know that, and we're in a bad situation with inflation. But having said that, do you think they'll be able to actually get anything through, get anything done in a bipartisan way?
Well, one of the things that I hope that they prioritize, because I just think it's something that is kind of low-hanging fruit politically, is they need to go after this advancement and this expansion of the IRS in a very dangerous way that I think could result in the audits of a lot of middle-class Americans in the next fiscal year, going after, people, as Janet Yellen have said, who they believe are engaging in some kind of, a malfeasance when it comes to their tax returns, understanding that middle-class and upper-middle-class Americans who are paying people with Venmo and that kind of thing are people they want to go after because they think that they can get a whole horde of money from them. I think that's something that Republicans should pass as quickly as possible, because there are a number of Democrats on the Senate side who I think would actually be on their side on that issue,
right,
or would have difficulty politically going into an election year in 2024 where a lot of them are going to be running within red states that are not going to be very happy about what they see from this IRS.
Yeah, and that's why, part of the conversation around the runoff in Georgia on December 6th is that, it does matter. Every seat matters, because when these conversations and these votes are so close, if even one person or two people on the other side flip, all of a sudden it can change the direction that an issue goes.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And one of the things that I think is really important to keep in mind is, as much as people might be disappointed about the outcome when it came to 2022, and certainly I was when it came to the Senate, you look at someone like Herschel Walker and you basically say, if you just leave him behind at this point, if you say you're not going to try to get him elected, what are you saying to those future Republicans where it might make a huge difference down the road based on the decision that you've made? And look, we have a leadership in Washington that is decrepit. We have the oldest speaker right now, because Nancy Pelosi is still speaker. We have the oldest president. We have a president pro tem who's about to turn 90 until they get around her, who wasn't apparently even aware that she was up for the job, in Dianne Feinstein. And you have really a leadership that is just out of touch with Americans. We have to have new leadership, new generations of people who are raising these issues.
I think you bring up a great point, Ben. It's always great chatting with you, getting your perspective. And of course, Nancy Pelosi is one of the big topics we're going to be talking about it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie.